Hello, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar, The Emotional Impact of Racial Violence on Workplace Productivity. This is a time to listen, learn, and act. Thank you all for joining us for this very important conversation. My name is Tanisha, and I am the President and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce of Central Florida. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator of the hour, Attorney Ernest Deloach, who serves as Vice President of Legal for Balfour Beatty. He is also a member of the Florida Division Leadership National Team. Ernest has over 20 years of experience as an attorney and business advisor. He serves as the General Counsel for the African American Chamber of Commerce of Central Florida Board of Directors, and more importantly, Ernest is not only a colleague, but a good friend. Before I hand the microphone over to Ernest, I have a few housekeeping rules I'd like to go over. First, we want this to be a conversation in which the audience can participate. We ask that during the session and during this hour, please post your questions in the chat queue where it says questions. Next, we'd love to hear from you. We also would like for you to show this with your social media network. So we ask that this webinar, which will be recorded and available on our website, www.blackcommerce.org, please show it and post it with your network. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by turning it over to Ernest. Ernest, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Tanisha. And good morning to everyone. We're really looking forward to an honest and impactful and productive conversation, and it's a pleasure to introduce our panelists who are going to help guide us through this really important discussion. First is Dr. Janie Lacey. Dr. Lacey is a relationship trauma therapist who helps individuals and couples heal from painful experiences to build and maintain healthy relationships. Her practice, Life Counseling Solutions, has a team that includes 8 therapists who specialize in different areas to serve our community. Welcome, Dr. Lacey. Next, Mr. Paul Drayton. Paul is Vice President at JP Morgan Chase. He's a commercial banker in middle market banking within the commercial banking division. In his current role as a commercial banker, he's responsible for delivering comprehensive solutions for clients in Central Florida with annual revenues typically between $20 and $500 million. His primary goal is to effectively help companies grow and meet its objectives through the utilization of the products and services offered by JP Morgan. He's actively involved in his community, sits on the board for the Central Florida United Negro College Fund, the Downtown Orlando Partnership, and Winter Park Achievement Foundation, as well as an active member of Florida Blue Key, 100 Black Men of Greater Orlando, and leadership of Orlando Class 97, the best class I was in as well. Thank you, Paul, for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Next is Miss Wendy Carter Stewart. Wendy is known for her inspiring and energetic disposition. She's the founder of Emerge Development Solutions, a leadership coaching and consulting firm specializing in the transformation of people, teams, and organizations. She partners with clients to deliver thoughtful, customized solutions to resolve their most critical challenges. Wendy's unique and effective approach has delivered exceptional outcomes and sustainable results. Wendy received a Master of Human Resources Management from DeVry and a Senior Certified Professional Credential from the Society of Human Resource Management. She's an expert in personality assessments. She's certified in DISC, Myers-Briggs, and Predictive Index. In her spare time, Wendy serves as a member of Pearls and Prayer and Enough Christian Ministries and serves on the board of the National Association of African Americans and Human Resources. Thank you, Wendy, for being with us. Next is fellow attorney and colleague, Camille Evans. Camille is the managing partner for Virtus LLP. She summarizes her daily work as building communities, as she regularly counsels public and private finance transactions in a wide variety of sectors, including general government, airports, healthcare, toll roads, K-12 education, higher ed, community development districts, utilities, and nonprofits. Currently, she is serving as the chair of the Orange County 2020 Charter Review Commission, chair of the West Orange Political Alliance, member of the boards of directors of the Creative City Project and the West Orange Chamber of Commerce, and is a member of the Finance Committee for Health Central Hospital. Camille's involvement includes being a member of the National Association of Securities Professionals, the National Association of Bond Lawyers, the National Forum of Black Administrators, and it's not listed, but I know she's a proud alum of FSU Law School, which just happens to be my alma mater. So she's much smarter than when she got in with me, though. And last but certainly not least, let me introduce Latria Graham. Latria Graham is known as a game changer. She's a leading cause marketing strategist in the corporate, sports, and entertainment industry. She's the president of Graham League Branding. Latria helps sports leagues, professional athletes, large corporations, and universities build their brand through authentic communication strategies and innovative promotional products. You've seen her work in the NBA, ESPN, BET, USA Today. Current clients include the NFL, NBA athletes, NCAA coaches, USTA, NASCAR, University of Florida, Duke Energy, and the list goes on. Ms. Graham and her company is a recent recipient of the 2019 Minority Business Enterprise of the Year in the entire state of Florida, awarded by the Florida State Minority Supplier Diversity Council. We're really happy to have Latria and our entire panel. Thank you all for your time. Well, let's get right to it. As I sort of put some notes together to try to prepare for sort of directing traffic a bit here and really letting our panelists lead us in this discussion, there was one quote that really sat with me and was top of mind and really resonated throughout this period we've all been experiencing. And the quote is this: "To be a Negro in this country and to be conscious is to be in rage almost all the time." One of the more famous quotes of the writer, playwright James Baldwin. And while certainly we all can look through our collective experiences to understand why the frustration, the anger, the sadness has really, in a way, exploded in a way we've not seen in this lifetime, there is something different this time. And I wonder, Dr. Lacey, if you could help us understand what is it that's different this time around, and how is it affecting Black professionals who are living this duality of a certain mindset in the workplace and at the exact same time understanding the realities of the world around them?
Well, Ernest, firstly, it is different. And one of the main reasons why it's different is because we now have the nation's attention. So we have dealt with, in psychology, we look at micro and macro aggressions, right? So we have these situations that are now caught on tape till we are now living. And now, not only from that micro injustice, but it's also bringing up from an individual level all of the injustices that we all have had as Black people, whether it's been in that college class where you've been mostly sitting with white counterparts and the professor is surprised that you are smart, right? So we have all these subtle racial things that we've experienced. And now we're having a conversation about it. Now there's no way that we can get out of these certain times where the racial trauma that have been generational that are now coming to surface, it has the nation's attention. And it's a time that's more important than ever. And going back to exactly to what you said, I mean, we're now all the feelings that have now been pressed down are coming to the surface. We have righteous anger and we have a right to be angry. We have the sadness, we have the frustration, we have the anxiety, we have all of the different things that most people have experienced and talked about it, but have had hopelessness as far as making a difference. So now nationally, we have the attention and we're coming together collectively because we all are experiencing psychological stress, but the ways in which we're having the conversation can make a difference.
That's excellent. You know, you make mention of going back even in our personal lives, not necessarily back through the history of African Americans in this country, but you know, if you went to a majority white institution for higher education, as I know myself, Camille, Paul have done, and then transitioning into corporate careers, the microaggressions, the accumulation of hurts and harms that have built up over time that now find themselves expressing in a way that we haven't seen now. I'm wondering, Paul, you're a UF grad, preeminent institution in the state of Florida. You work for one of the largest banks in the world. What has it felt like, if you don't mind sharing, for you going through sort of the progression from college to professional life, and now this seminal moment that we're all feeling right now?
No, great question. When it came to social life experiences, I'll say my greatest takeaway from going to the University of Florida, which is a primarily white institution, was the social aspects that I was able to learn from that, not necessarily the education I was provided. In that, I was in certain situations where you are looked at as that Black person and act accordingly, and there's a spot for you, but you need to act accordingly, right? So this is something we've kind of been raised and taught since birth, of just how to carry yourselves. Unfortunately, the situations we're in, we're expected to represent the entire Black population. While we don't necessarily agree with that, that's just the reality of the situation. So I know now that I transferred from going to University of Florida, and just a quick stat there, University of Florida was founded in the 1800s, right? And my time there to talk about how I was the 4th Black treasurer of that school is really just a really sad statement. Why is that possible, right? And then going from Gainesville, Florida to New York City. I'd never been in New York City in my entire life, born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida. We could talk about those dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
It was an eye-opener, right? And particularly being in a big firm like JP Morgan Chase. And I had to make sure I was that much more prepared, the way I carried myself, the way I dressed, the way I talked, the way I interact with individuals, because I was representing more than myself. And I also didn't want to get that title of, well, look, he's actually not that smart. So I didn't have there was no leeway to not be, quote unquote, like on point in your job. And then I quickly learned, and even being in these environments, is you'll realize we're often put in positions where our voices aren't necessarily able to be heard in the positions that the firms generally offer, because you're not necessarily directly touching that client. So, what you'll find out is, we do decent on the spectrum of diversity, and you can call that many different things now. And I think corporates have been given a pass over the past, call it 5 years or a decade, and how we define that and look at those numbers, and we've somehow gotten morphed into that. But I think going into that, it was always, and it still remains a top priority, is to get more Black faces that actually represent these large corporations. Not just Black faces in middle office, back office, customer service, executive administrations, but what do the boardrooms look like? What do the executive leadership teams look like in those operating committees? So it's important for us as Black people to make sure we position ourselves that way. And being it from a primarily white institution, that was very front of mind from the ongoing of where we need to kind of set ourselves apart.
No, I appreciate that, Paul. You touched on something that sort of resonated with me, and I sort of looked to Camille when you mentioned that there is a desire to bring in Black faces, but perhaps not as strong a desire to honor Black experience. You talked about how you're looked at as one of the few representatives in the company, and therefore, but representing all of Black America in a way. But at the same time, there are certain aspects, I imagine, Camille, that aren't always welcome in the workplace, and that seems to compound the pain we're feeling. Can you talk about, Camille, I mentioned, is an entrepreneur, owns her own firm, but Camille was a partner in one of the largest firms in the world at one point. And so what is it like, especially in this moment, to know that you're welcomed to a certain extent culturally?
Ernest, it's a great question. And I must say that the experience that Paul discussed is very similar to what you experience in big law. And I think in many business settings, the fact is that there has been a trend towards diversity and inclusion, and you've seen it in all these different institutions. But then the question is, what exactly does that feel like? And what does that really look like? Are you, for example, pulling your diverse talent for the sake of having a better response on RFP, and then are you actually engaging them? And then I think, that's from the institutional side, but from the individual side, you want to push, you want to be that person who can bring not just the diversity, but also the skills and to deploy your skills. But you also do it with this extra weight of, I better not mess up, and I better say it the right way. And I need to help you all being the institution, get comfortable with this diversity and inclusion. But in me doing that, I've also got to balance making sure I don't turn into an imposter, because I need to give you my true authentic self if we're going to really have diversity and inclusion. And I think that's where you really miss a lot, because what happens in that same dynamic is you have folks at the top who are, yes, we're going to be a diverse and inclusive organization. You have, unfortunately, more of your diverse people in junior roles. And then you have that middle space where there's a serious disconnect about what does diversity, does it matter? Are we being inclusive? Does it matter? And if you give these other people an opportunity, what are they losing? And so you kind of have to be this multi, like an octopus, like you're trying to help advance the company, trying to help advance your own skill set, because you didn't develop all these skills to not be able to use them. But you also have to keep your coworkers comfortable that they're not going to rock the boat too much, so they're still, collaborative with you, and yet do you bring your full self? And it's a very difficult challenge. And I think in the right places they're allowing people to be more transparent about that, and also forcing those who are not on the forefront of the diversity and inclusion initiative to still be responsible for owning up to it. And I think that's where institutions have to find their next step, is how do you require and reinforce that requirement, an atmosphere of inclusion?
Camille, I think that's outstanding. We're going to get to D&I initiatives as we move toward the end of our talk. And I want to remind everyone who's listening, if you have questions, feel free to post them. We will save time at the end. Perhaps there may be even some time interspersed between our conversations where we might use them. I feel like, Dr. Lacey, what we're really doing is sort of, you can take the lawyer out of the courtroom, you can't get the courtroom out of the lawyer. So forgive me. I feel like we're making a case and layering evidence of all the microaggressions that were sitting barely under the surface that have now been pricked and come forward. So, Paul's talked about, even briefly, growing up in the South, in Jacksonville. I'm from Daytona Beach. We've talked about collegiate experiences, professional experiences. I want to add, if I could, Latria, because I know you to be, amongst many things, a very proud mom. And so add now the additional layer of what it's like just professionally to work as a woman of color, while at the same time being a mother. And then this powder keg, in a way, emotionally, on top of all the layering we've discussed, the murder of Judge George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. What is that like when you add the aspect of being a parent to the juggling act that Camille just described? Many of us are trying to balance, and now in the midst of this climate. What's that like?
Well, I'll say, Ernest, it's been very hard. And as a small business owner trying to recover from COVID, and then being told that you are now a teacher at home, and then adding to that what I like to call the cafeteria worker. You're actually having to make meals at home. And it really mentally is draining, because if you are a go-getter, if you are passionate about keeping the business afloat, you have to come to the realization that your productivity level will not be the same. And I think that I really mentally had to accept that I can't do it all. I am a superwoman in my head, but in reality, during these past 3 months, the kryptonite got me. So it definitely has been challenging and mentally stressful. And having outlets is very important, to talk to other business owners to help encourage you and inspire you, has been my way of coping, if you will, with the pressure of so many balls to juggle at once.
No, That's an excellent point. And it goes right toward where I wanted to chat with Wendy Carter. You know, Wendy, you're in the HR sphere, you're advising companies on a regular basis. A lot of what we've discussed thus far is no surprise. The difficulties of, you know, really working and living behind the veil in a way, as Du Bois said, the duality of life for Black professionals. But now added, as Latria made clear, there's been COVID. You know, I literally had a tornado come down my street the other night. You know, and of course everything else going on. What sorts of things can employers, or are you advising employers or managers to do specific to their Black colleagues and employees and professionals to just assist with everything we've been talking about, Dr. Lacey's laid out?
That's a great question, Ernest. I think it's a very important one for people to note. I think it's an awkward time, it's a sad time, and so it's important that organizations practice empathy versus sympathy. Because what can happen when a leader is ill-equipped to respond to their Black employees' concern around the racial injustice is to be ill-equipped and ask a question that's a little insensitive, right? And so it's important that organizations educate leaders about racial inequalities, diversity awareness, so that when they're approaching their employees with these conversations, they have the appropriate things to say. What has been happening because of the lack of awareness and diversity and racial inequality in the workplace is that people are approaching these conversations inauthentically, which leads for it to create an awkward interaction. So what we see, Ernest, happening is either there's silence in these discussions. So just for example, I know someone who shared that they walked into a meeting the Monday after everything kind of broke loose with George Floyd, feeling a sense of sadness and kind of trauma around what has happened being a Black professional, walking into a virtual meeting and no one saying anything, right? And so there's a couple of things that we pull from that. Number one, those colleagues were not equipped to respond in the way that they felt comfortable in responding, right? Everyone's afraid to say the wrong thing. Am I going to say the wrong thing to this person? Am I going to set them off? Am I going to come off as insensitive? So I want everyone to also provide space for the people who you're expecting to reach out to get some grounding and appropriateness around how they reach out, right? Because we don't want those awkward interactions to occur. And I think also what we're seeing here as well is that silence is not the answer, right? And so if you're not clear about how to approach someone with this conversation as a leader of someone who's a Black employee, it's as simple as checking in, right? How are you doing? How are you feeling, right? We want to avoid those conversations that you're not equipped to have. Saying that you have someone that's a Black friend or a Black neighbor who may be experiencing something, that comes off disingenuous and forced, right? So just checking in, showing that you care is helpful. What connects us all, you mentioned to Latria, you're a mom, right? Despite color, despite race, despite background, lots of us are parents. So checking in with empathy and saying, wow, as a mom, I can't imagine how I would feel, you know, in your shoes right now, being a Black mom, things like that. So we want to find commonalities to connect us in having those difficult conversations, especially in the workplace. But I think we want to avoid a couple of things. One, the disingenuous conversations, the awkward silence. And I think what companies should do, what's helpful here, is creating a platform for folks to talk. I've seen lots of organizations with their affinity groups having panels sharing, you know, just some of their feelings and some of their experiences. I think the danger in companies not responding with action is that if you're sending out a letter to the masses about your response to racial inequality, but your leadership team is not reflective of diversity, and you know, having initiatives that prove that you care about diversity, that is very isolating for your diverse employees, right? Because you're putting one face onto the public, but internally we see the truth. There's so many dynamics for organizations to be responsible in this space, and they include creating platforms for people to share, allowing people to be involved in the solution, and also walking the talk, right? Because if you are saying that you support racial equality, then your company should be reflective of that.
Absolutely.
So those are just some of the elements that are happening within the workplace.
That's outstanding, Wendy. Thank you. And I know there are a number of leaders on the call today who represent various corporations or organizations, and I know they took really good notes as how to implement some of those things. I want to take a quick poll of the panelists, because you made I think an excellent point about sometimes, showing empathy is as simple as reaching out and just asking how someone's doing. I know my wife and I have been just chatting amongst ourselves, who we've heard from, and how sincere that's been for us. So I'm just curious, by show of hands, who on the panel has heard from a non-African American friend, colleague, etc., who just checked in on you and your family based on what they recognize had to be an emotionally stressful time? Okay, that's great. I think that's everybody. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot to talk about the awkwardness, but it's good to know that at least we've experienced to a certain extent those reaching out. Dr. Lacey, I want to go to you a little bit. One of the things Wendy talked about in terms of what employers can do beyond just empathy and showing a sincere concern for their employees, and then walking that walk. A lot of corporations have what we call EAP services, employee assistance programs, that allow for, amongst many things, therapy. And I'm wondering if it's not been that long, but since Mr. Floyd's death, or even since COVID, have you seen an uptick in the number of persons who are coming in and that are speaking directly to these situations? And could you talk a little bit to what, if any, barrier there is to African Americans seeking out those services, and how they maybe need to be promoted in a different way by employers specific to people of color?
The first thing that we're seeing a lot is just acknowledgement across the board. So specifically, whether it's our white clients or African American clients, there's an acknowledgement of what's happening in the nation and how that's affecting everyone. And I think what's most important there, to what Wendy had said, is acknowledgement, right? Mm-hmm. So when we think about, all of us can think about if we've had our heart broken, for example, and just a person who hurt us, if they acknowledge that they hurt us, just how that feels. So when we think about collectively what's going on, whether it's our employer, whether it's our white counterparts, or those that may not have experienced or known someone that experienced injustice, just the acknowledgement alone. So when we go into the workplace to have an employer who acknowledges that, I see what's going on, I may not understand it from your position, but there are some opportunities here that I want to make sure I can support you. And going back to what Wendy said, if people don't know what to say, ask. How can I best support you? And part of that could be letting you know that we have an EAP service. So if you have a need to want to use these services, if you have a need to help us support you in counseling or therapy, so you have a place to deal with the stress, the anxiety of everything that's going on in the world that's confidential, that's just your space. As an employer, I want to help you do that. So when we acknowledge that and we give them the resources and the support along the way, that's going to make them feel important. Because we can all have experiences where we have the opposite happen. Things are happening in the world to a point where things are not acknowledged, and you feel the inferiority that's happening in the workplace, and you're not have a place to discuss it. So I think the number one thing from a psychological standpoint and from a mental health standpoint is acknowledging that there is a need for it, and acknowledging that these are our resources and our support, and having you able to take advantage of that. And if you don't have that, then figure out ways in which you can support them by asking someone directly or asking the office directly, and acknowledging what's happening, I think goes a long way.
No, that's excellent. I appreciate that. Camille, I want to turn to you because you mentioned something a few moments ago, and I'm gonna paraphrase, and I'm borrowing from Paul's prior comment as well, that when you're one of the very few in the company and things like this happen, and unfortunately they've happened a lot over the last decade and even longer than that, you find yourself as the de facto D&I officer. Right, you're the one, as Dr. Lacey and Wendy have described. You're kind of the one that's the that's the management whisperer. You're talking to management about potentially what should be done. You're also reaching out to your fellow African American employees and checking in on them. And I wonder from your perspective, and I like to hear Paul's as well. When we talk about the layered emotional distress or stress that comes with who and what we are, talk about that component for a moment, where you're, you are in a position to do good by your coworkers and to educate your managers, but it carries an additional stress as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Most of the people that we enjoy working with are people who have an open door, people who are willing to, you have an issue, come talk to me, let's figure out a solution. And most of us strive to be that person, and not in a, I should say, in a very genuine way. That's what we want to be. And it's interesting because as you carry yourself in that capacity, you are automatically finding yourself in these conversations. And it's interesting because I have found over the last couple of weeks that I have to remind myself, oh, okay, it's one of these conversations. You might have just called to talk about, some documents, but then it's how you handling things, how are you doing? And, you may not be ready to be that support person. And, I've at times had to talk myself through like, okay, turn that switch on. I am not Dr. Lacey. So it's like, I got some good sense, but I'm not always Dr. Lacey. So you have to balance that because you still got to get the deal done, the job done. People need the food on their table, and the roof over their heads. But you also still have to help bridge this divide, and yet still do it and make sure you try not to project, try not to be, cynical or pessimistic. You want to give people the benefit of their desire to have a dialogue, but then also you have to balance that with, am I being authentic if I don't call you all the way on the carpet in this conversation and be absolutely honest about how I appreciate your wishes and concerns? This ain't new, and let's talk about that. So it's difficult because, and then on top of that, like, I had a call the other day. I need to get documents out. I called me to talk about something, and we ended up on the phone. It was a lawyer from from Jacksonville, and he did not look like me. And it turned into an hour and 15-minute call that touched on a number of different things. And he was, we have very different politics. And he even brought up, our prior president, our esteemed 44's, half brother in Africa. And we had to have that conversation, and I had to help him through it. And I couldn't, respond in angst and frustration. And I still needed to get the deal done that we were working on together. So it's, you want to put the phone on mute and be like, bro, what are we doing? But at the same time, you have to engage. And I say all that to say it's tasking. But what I've kind of come to my revelation is that, this may be the way I do my sit-in. This may be my freedom ride. This may be my, responsibility at how I engage on the front line. So it's not always comfortable, but, it's definitely, what's necessary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Paul, did you want to add to that?
Sure. When there's things that have happened that have been somewhat racially motivated, being that go-to kind of felt definitely like, okay, you're just asking me to do this because I am the Black person, right? I think the good news, at least with this one is, and in full transparency, you're right. I was one of two people tapped to lead an effort to begin these conversations for the state of Florida. It's also something I'm passionate about. So I'm more than honored and obligated, and I'm going to have to work beyond overtime. I think my day job is hard enough because I have to be very careful in the way that we handle this as a firm, because we cannot lose out on this opportunity of what just happened. And being so emotionally tied to this and impacted, I don't mind taking that on. But we also, please believe, my employer is also going to ask me at the end of the year, what did you contribute to the business, right? And these are going to be very, very not explicit numbers that I can say that I did. So I'm gonna have to make sure I do my job as well while maintaining all this. But yeah, there's never been a comfortable conversation about race, right? But I think now the way we phrase this is a huge listening, learning opportunity. And then guess what? When you ask me that question, what can I do? All right, number one, I immediately then need to educate you, right? Because this is not my problem. This is all of our problem. Literally not asking for more rights or asking for equal rights. Previously, when we were just asking people to be civil, where we got civil rights from, right? So, you know, what we did was take a step back and say, take the initiative to educate yourself. Because one thing you'll find common in most job applications is a self-starter and someone who takes initiative. So for a manager or someone to say, well, what can we do? Let's take that same approach, all hands on deck. Let's do this together and educate. And then we're going to send out resources on a regular basis to start having these conversations. We had our first kickoff with small groups yesterday. The firm's doubling down on their efforts, what we've been doing with advancing Black pathways, and then what we're going to do from a whole global diversity standpoint. But absolutely key and necessary. It is much more added pressure between what we've been feeling through everything going on top of this, but it's what we have to do, and kind of these same things we've been put in since our birthright, right? This ain't nothing new, being under this pressure and doing more than we need to do, but absolutely necessary. No, that's excellent. Look, I need to stop right now and really thank all of you, and I know others who aren't on the panel, for just the leadership you're providing in what's really a difficult situation. And really, in a way, you're putting aside your own emotional pain really for the benefit of others. And that's the way we're going to see any progress. And so I just want to thank you all for that and what you're doing. I want to go back to the point Wendy made about empathy, and that Dr. Lacey made about acknowledgement, because one of the ways that we've seen corporations are beginning to at least publicly demonstrate some of that empathy and acknowledgement are what's become quite ubiquitous now, like public statements, right? There have been a number of CEO memos, letters to staff, media statements, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, Latria, you're being in the branding industry, and how important is it at this point to have a statement versus no statement? What should the statement say? What is sufficient to show the level of acknowledgement and empathy? And then jumping ahead a bit to where Camille and Paul are, how we move forward. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Well, to answer your question, I do think it's critical for organizations to make a public statement denouncing racism, but in these times, you must first understand that you have to practice what you preach. And what we've seen across the past month is corporate brands sort of act like the news media. They want to be fast, first, and furious versus really understanding what is going on, taking a step back and making an internal effort to see, is there any way that our organization is contributing to this? What am I doing? What am I not doing? So really taking a conscious effort to ask themselves, you know, how can I really fix this problem? And so I think amongst the marketing experts out in the industry, they've done some research, and they looked at 300 of the top brands around America, and 70% of those brands actually did come out with a statement, but less than half of those brands actually included in those statement any action plan towards ending racial inequality, or injustice. And so even less actually also showed that they didn't even acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement or an effort to end police brutality, which is perceived in the Black community as that you're playing it safe. You're not authentically and genuinely concerned with supporting our community. And so whether it was done intentionally or unintentionally, I just think that brands really have to understand that branding serves as the foundation of your mission, your values, and that must permeate through all practices of your organization, whether it's in hiring employees, your diversity and inclusion programs. So I have heard a lot of people saying silence is you not doing anything about it, but I do think that makes sense from an individual consumer perspective. But from a brand perspective, if you're going to come out and make a statement, I think you need to make sure that you have a strategy in place to really listen, act on what you're saying, and that there's measurable impact, that once you make that statement, they can come back to. Because I will tell you, the days are long over for brands to make blanket statements. The millennials and Gen Z population, they're not going for it. They're not politically correct. They are going to ask you questions. So this is a new day in branding, marketing, communications. So your communication strategy has to be authentic. Otherwise, you're contributing to the problem.
Right. You know, I see Wendy nodding, and I want to go to her. We're going to pivot before we end to some practical solutions. But Wendy, you talked about earlier about, you know, one of the things a company can do to actually assist their employees in processing through these emotions is to help make them part of the solution. And Latria's point about statements gone wrong, the first that comes to mind was an NFL statement, who got blasted after making this blanket statement and, you know, the toleration and love for diversity. And we're reminded of a gentleman named Colin Kaepernick. And I'm told, we believe the reports, it was NFL employees that went to the commissioner and said, you got to fix this. And in fact, a second statement came out, and going back to Dr. Lacey's point, where the NFL acknowledged they were wrong. And so a great example, Latria, of a statement that did not land well. Persons in the organization, people of color, who pushed to correct it, and then a stronger acknowledgement. But Wendy, I want to go to your point of talk about again just what does it mean and what does it look like for employees to be part of the solution, whether drafting a statement or more than that, and really just fixing the endemic racism as part of the business world.
Absolutely. I'll definitely respond to that, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to respond to what Latria just said about those blanket statements in the communication strategies, and the Gen Z and millennials paying attention to the action not being taken. They are also going to be paying attention, and it will impact the recruitment strategy. They're going to start asking those questions. They're paying attention. Who are the companies that are speaking out and actually taking steps to create solutions, right? And so when you're recruiting from these top universities and you want these diverse candidates, those individuals are going to start asking questions and wanting to see some actions being taken based on where we are right now. So it's not only the branding, but also the people that you attract in the future. This will impact that as well. So I just wanted to speak on that. When I think about the solution, I think that the most important thing to me is around education and awareness. And so, Paul, I have a similar background to you. As I lived in New York most of my life. I moved to Florida 4 years ago. The workforce landscape in New York City is totally different than Central Florida. I was used to working in very diverse environments with affinity groups and executives looking like me. And so when I came here, I was in shock. I was in total shock around the professional landscape. And what I'm not seeing, what I'd like to see, and what would be helpful to create solution in this space is HR being a liaison and an advocate for folks to feel comfortable, right? Having a place to share, knowing that if I express myself and how I feel and take a stance in a very tactful way, that there will be no retaliation against me, right? Creating psychological safety in those discussions. I have the extra burden of being a professional, of having to code switch, of having to put on a mask in this setting to be accepted, to feel accepted at this table. And now I have this emotional trauma and I have no place to share it, right? So it's important that HR create partnerships with employees of color, creating platforms for them to share, enforcing and reassuring them that they will not be retaliated against if they create groups in which to create camaraderie and affinity groups to have initiatives to embrace diversity. Also, our leaders need to be educated at the highest level. What I'm not seeing in the Central Florida area are lots of executive tables with diverse people at those tables. And I would not be surprised if they are not aware of some of the complexities that Black employees face, right? So they're not able to address it. And how can they build strategy around it if there's not someone at the table speaking to it and influencing it, right? So it's important that leaders have the awareness and the education around diversity, the background, the impact, Also, having diversity at that table as well. We're the chief diversity officers, right? The chief diversity officer needs to be at that executive table influencing strategy around recruitment, around retention, around employee health, all of those things. And so the absence of that creates continued ignorance throughout the organization. So those are just two huge pieces that I'd like to recommend companies do. Number one, HR being a support partner and creating a platform for people to share and feel safe that they can share. And also our leaders at the highest level being influenced and educated on diversity awareness so that they are equipped to strategize, to lead diverse employees of their organization. So that we can start there.
No, that's huge, Wendy. Thank you so much. Dr. Lacey, I want to get one question to you, and then I want to do a little bit of speed round as we look to close. So what happens when non-Black employees are made to feel that they've been marginalized, their experience has been minimalized, undue attention has been paid to people of color? Is it possible that in that situation, the company trying to do the right thing, potentially Black employees feel even more ostracized and more isolated because of the manner in which others are perceiving the help that's coming their way?
Absolutely. Before today has occurred, we would hear on a micro level that we speak too much about race, or you make this about race, right? So we already have some of those systems that were already in place. But now with the national focus, the best thing I think we can do is exactly that, is open up conversations, have acknowledgement, and have an open conversation with everyone, because it's been a time, right? There's been a time where everyone else has had their time at the table, where everyone else has been, Black Americans have been made to feel, whether it's been advert, it's been intentional or unintentional, to feel inferior. So this can happen reversely. So if we have these conversations, we have acknowledgement. I know for us at Life Counseling Solutions, we've been hired multiple times to go into companies and address when someone has died, to go into grief counseling with companies, right? So if companies are not well equipped, there are well-informed therapists or well-informed consultants that are in the community, so they can bring in someone that's unbiased to their company to help them navigate these conversations. Because what I'll see with the leadership when we have these conversations is that they want to take themselves out of it because they're still in the company, to your point, where they'll feel like there's bias, there's favoritism, and then they feel confused. So there's many solutions to that. And I think the number one way that we can do that is we have funding to bring in grief counselors. We have funding to address other mental health issues. And to me, this would be a mental health issue.
Outstanding. And I think it's interesting as well, Dr. Lacey, I'm sure the panelists know, there are various states and municipalities now. Ohio is the biggest state that comes to mind immediately, that actually has declared racism a mental health concern. It is a public health concern, which really does seem to elevate the issue. As we've all said, it's not one specific to a person or a group, but one that really has a deleterious effect on our entire country from a holistic health standpoint. And so I think that's outstanding. Let me do this sort of rapid fire here. We're coming up on noon. I'm going to ask everyone to give a short answer if they can. So you have been given the magic wand to wave over corporate America. What specific policy prescription would you invoke with a snap of a finger to best and most immediately address unconscious bias, systemic racism in the workplace? And I'll start with Latria.
Okay, I think I'm going to go with making sure that you pay close attention to cultural diversity. And so I think there's been an emphasis on diversity from a race standpoint, but understanding that one Black person does not represent all Black people. That understanding that there are different socioeconomic backgrounds as well as age groups that have very diverse perspectives that can contribute to the success of your company. And so I think a lot of times cultural diversity is not considered in the diversity and inclusion platforms of organizations, which also can mean every race, gender, and background. So having all of those cultural perspectives integrated within your diversity and inclusion plan is very, very important to focus on cultural diversity. And from a marketing perspective, why this is important is because you may think you're speaking to the African American community, but your messages are not relatable to the African American community. And depending on the segment or sector that you're speaking to, you want to make sure you have internal experts that are actually in tune or have a perspective of that segment group. So I think while we focus on racial diversity and opportunities, also pay close attention to cultural diversity and have a plan and policy in place for that.
Okay, that's outstanding. Camille?
My answer on that would be that it would need to be a multifaceted approach. That number one, you need to have a vertical integration of diversity, as in it needs to be from top to bottom, not just one person at every level of the company, that you have multiple representatives of multiple different diverse perspectives at every level. And I think also the other thing that you need to see is for each company, assume we're talking about companies, to be working on developing their workforce. You know, we see a lot of education disparity in the community that in turn leads to opportunity disparity. So I would think that a company that's really serious about having the diversity and not having the excuse of not being able to find qualified diverse candidates, that they need to really figure out how they can impact their community, get involved to cultivate that skill set in diverse candidates that then grow to really trust and appreciate them to be a part of their company. And then lastly, I think the other thing that I would say that I'd like to see from companies is for those who are doing business to business, are they doing diverse business to business? Are they actually making sure that they are engaging, diverse suppliers for a number of different things? Because it's not just, do you hire somebody, it's kind of like that, do I give you a fish or do I teach you to fish? Do I give you a $70,000 job or do I give you the opportunity to build your business and, have $7 million in revenue? So I really want to see a full integration into the commercial environment that business is engaging in, and making sure that it's not just, oh, look, we have 25% of our workforce is diverse. It's way deeper than that. And I think the same way they examine their full business model, they should examine it from a diverse perspective.
Mm-hmm. Outstanding. I'm going to tease my sister lawyer because I asked for one answer and she started with, I would take a multifaceted approach. And that's what lawyers do. That's what lawyers do to the judge all the time. Well, Judge, let me tell you this. But it was outstanding response, Camille. Thank you. Paul, what about you?
Wish we had a heads up on this question to address, 400 years of inequities from economic standpoint, education, healthcare, and the criminal justice system. But I would say set a specific year, whether that's 10, 15, or 20 years from now, where I want the representation from my company, the clients we do business with, the suppliers I work with, to just simply match the demographics of America. Mm-hmm. So like, if America is X population of this, our company should look like this in every single layer of the company. Our clients should reflect this in every single layer of that, and our supplier diversity do that. Set a date, and then that forces you to create actionable, tangible things where you have to put in policies, invest your money into certain areas that force you to get there so you meet that mandate. But we need to set a date today and commit to that and track it on a regular basis, otherwise we won't get there.
All right. Very good. A lot of accountability there. It makes sense. Wendy, what are you thinking?
My hope is that organizations start to intentionally invest in diversity. And, with this multifaceted approach, I agree with Camille. When I talk about investing in diversity, let it be a part of your strategic imperative initiative for the year to come, which include programs, executives that you're going to put in place, outreach, recruiting practices. Like, it needs to be a holistic approach to it, and they need to be able to invest in it so we can actualize it and see it take place in the organization. So that's my hope.
Outstanding. Dr. Lacey, what do you think?
I think we need to have focus on our mental health services in our organizations and making sure that they're well supported and that there's no backlash to using those services. So if someone doesn't want to use an EAP service, partnering with private organizations, but then also under that is addressing the workplace bullying when someone does report uncomfortable feelings about any type of racial slurs or feeling certain comments that were made in joking fashion, so to speak, that there's no backlash to that, and there's policies that protect the workplace bullying around racism.
You know, it sounds like from all the disparate and wonderful ideas that everyone's come up with, the one word that rings true for me is investment. It sounds like, you know, this just isn't an opportunity to sort of make a statement condemning racism or embracing diversity. It's not even potentially even about necessarily enacting some programs or some assistance to employees. It's dollars. It's investing money into creating and developing a workplace environment that all of you have described. And I just think that's interesting because we talked about, Latria talked about the number of statements that did not mention concrete action plans. There were a number of statements, though, that included monies paid, frankly, to other organizations. It sounds like maybe we need to invest in the organizations themselves to get some of the change we're looking for. So I see now that we're at the question answer stage. I am looking for assistance here. I don't see any questions from the audience just yet. So let me offer my final question for the panel, and perhaps there'll be others that follow from the audience. You know, we'd be remiss if we didn't point out the fact that in the midst of these multiple tragedies, there have been amazing showings of love, sincerity, empathy, solidarity. And I wonder if any of you would just share, either personally or something you've seen nationally or internationally, what's the best thing you've seen that's come out of this, or that's evidenced itself since all this came to the fore? And let me start with Dr. Lacey, and we'll work our way down.
One of the things that I'm seeing that I feel like will be long lasting is the impact that this is going to have on our children, right? I have an 8-year-old boy. So the conversations and all the things that we are doing now because of what's happening in our nation, the good thing that I see is that he is probably going to have a different experience than I had growing up. And that's my hope out of all of this, is that there truly is change, that we're just not going to just jump on what's happening now, that the long-lasting effects, there will be policy changes, there will be repercussions, there will be mental health practices, that there's going to be some long-lasting changes from what's happening that will impact my son as he grows up.
That's excellent. Excellent. What about you, Wendy? What's the best thing you've seen that's come out of this?
Dr. Lacey, I'm also a mom of 2 boys, and this touched me in a deep way. And aside from being a founder of my own company, I also work for a large company. And I remember not walking in, I'm virtual, but being in my first virtual meeting that day, just feeling a heaviness and not feeling safe to share, but having to show up. And I remember receiving a text from a coworker who I would not even imagine would send me a text to just say, I'm thinking about you, I'm thinking about your boys, and I'm wondering how you feel. And I just felt so cared for and acknowledged, because I've lived through Trayvon Martin, that experience, and I didn't get this kind of, response, and that was very hurtful too, and several other experiences. But this time, somebody actually recognized that it was hurtful, that it wasn't right, and wasn't afraid to reach out to me in touch. And I've gotten several, folks who I work with who have reached out that way. So that for me signifies significant change. And I think because we're all locked in and had to watch it, it impacts us the same way. So that was what was new for me in this, and I hope that empathy continues.
Right. Paul, what about you?
I'd say is you started this off, Ernest, how you said this feels different, and this feels very, very different, and I think for multiple reasons. But I think the lasting thing is going to be great here is just the overall support of this being everybody's problem and not just the Black community's problem. When you think about allies, and I'm not a huge fan of the term allies. I like it, I coined this term from my friend Willie Jackson from Jacksonville. He wants you to be like an accomplice to the solution, right? Of how people are making this their problem, realizing, okay, just teaching my kids to teach everybody to treat everybody the same no matter what they look like it's not enough, or I've always done right and always treated all my black friends great. Like that was never enough, but I just turned kind of a blind eye based on my inherent privilege, or things, this bubble I was able to live in. But folks just across, the communities, our jobs, really being genuine, interesting, let's solve this problem together. And I think that's the biggest lasting thing from this situation.
Outstanding. Camille, what have you seen that's inspired you and given you some hope?
I actually have a short answer this time. I think our other panelists have said it very well. The bottom line for me is that I'm glad we're all here uncomfortable. I think a lot of diverse people Black people have been the ones who've been uncomfortable. A lot of people are uncomfortable and they don't look like us. And I want us to sit in that discomfort and figure out how to make it right.
Yeah, amen. Amen. Latria, what do you think?
I actually, can you hear me?
I do. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I jumped off the webcam because Tanisha's going to jump on shortly. But
okay.
The best part of this that came, and because I work a lot with sports clients, the best statement, I don't have enough time to actually read it or share it, but the University of Florida's soccer coach, Becky Burley, if you have time to go and look at the statement that she released, it was very powerful. She started with, I am part of the problem, and went through how she is a part of the problem and professing some of the biases that she's had publicly. And then she ends it with, I am part of the solution, and what she was going to commit to do to solve this problem. And it was so bold and powerful. I don't have the time to go through it, but if you have time, the University of Florida soccer coach, Becky Burley, she nailed it. She nailed it from every standpoint. So that was one of the most powerful statements for me that came out of all of this.
Right. That's great. I think it's important that we all, take a piece. Certainly don't forget the pain and the angst that brought us here. We can't ever allow that to be forgotten or brushed under the rug. But I think it's important for all of us, for our children, for our own sanity, to find something we can actually attach ourselves to that makes it a little easier to move forward. I'll share one quick story, and then I understand we do have some questions that Tanisha is going to share. And it goes back to soccer. Of the number of people that I was bugging in the aftermath of Mr. Floyd's death, and Tanisha was nice enough to respond, and Camille and I had a conversation regarding some community policing efforts, and my city commissioner and others I've reached out to. One of the persons I reached out to was my kid's soccer coach, and I'm a dad of two. Our kids are 10 and 7, and I thought it was important that while we're working for the right statements and the right way forward on a macro level, criminal justice reform, housing discrimination, employment discrimination, every facet of society where racism has touched, I wanted my kids to feel comfortable and loved in their soccer environment. And so I just sent an email to the soccer coach and said, hey, what's the league going to say about this? And I don't need them to take a hardened, politicized stance, but can they just acknowledge that some of your kids are black and brown, and when they step off that field, they live a different life than those that aren't. And he warmly received my email, and he actually called me, and we talked. And what I found impactful, and it gives me some hope, and I shared it with my son to allay some of his concerns, is that he said to me, we actually went to a march. He's white, he and his kids. We went to a march to show our solidarity. We talked to our kids about why we're there. And I understood in looking in their eyes, they could see the wrong and hate that others were treated that way. He said, but Ernest, until I got your email, I didn't realize that that's not a fear that they live, though. It's a fear they can see, but they don't live it. And so I just felt, at least in that one instance, in one conversation with one person who has a direct impact on my kids' lives recreationally, he gets it. And so that's something I can move forward with some degree of positivity. We're going to hang around. I believe Madam President Tanisha Gary is going to rejoin us if she hasn't already. I may not be able to see with my screen. Great. And she's going to pose some questions that we received from our audience. And I'm just going to, in case I don't get the opportunity, thank all of you again for your participation, for being dragged in and drafted by Tanisha. And Tanisha, you know, understanding my persistence and petulance and allowing this to go forward. And just thank you for all the wealth of personal anecdotes and professional antidotes you provided to us moving forward. Tanisha.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ernest, and to all of our panelists for sharing your time and your experiences, your personal stories with all of us today. Before we close out, though, we do have quite a bit of questions that came through, some even before the webinar. The first one I'd like to pose is, how can higher education, including Seminole State College, make sure African American students are heard at this time of sorrow and frustration? We are offering all classes and service remotely right now, but our action plan could include some physically distanced activities this fall. Anybody want to take a stab at answering that question from Seminole State College?
My thoughts about that, Tanisha, would be first to, I'm a big believer in acknowledging it, right? So they can acknowledge with their students and offer them support, asking them what they need. And then based off of the feedback, that can move, it can move some initiatives based off of feedback. So I think acknowledging it, leaning into the student body, asking them what they need during this time, or even what they see, giving them, soliciting feedback. What do they see that can be different going forward? And getting either a committee or getting the powers that can be together and then make some type of action plan based off that feedback. So I think giving feedback, acknowledging it, and leaning in and asking them directly what they need during this time.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Lacey. Very good advice. Anyone else has anything to add on that? Okay, our next question. The conversation out there is that this will be over in a few weeks and it will all be forgotten. How do we keep this movement against racial discrimination alive? That comes from our
I'd like to jump on that.
Chamber. Yes, who would like to take a stab at that?
Camille, I'd love to. I think that is the responsibility of those of us who are seeking the healing. If you are trying to achieve a goal, you have to do the work. And sometimes you have to drag people along. So when the media has found another issue to focus on, when another tweet has come that distracts us, we have to stay focused on our job and on our message and on our mission, and to make sure that we just don't say, oh, well, it was different this time. It got a little closer, or a little more uncomfortable, but we didn't do anything. And it takes voting. It takes being vocal in your and transparent in your conversations with leadership and people who have the ability to be decision makers. And I think you have to challenge them. I think you have to be challenged, and you have to, one of the things I said before is you have to really do the work of learning to know what policies, the systems, and issues are, so that you can come up with a solution that actually, can be adopted and still preserve, some level of status, not status quo, and I say that as the operational success of an entity of whatever flavor, but yet still achieve the solutions for the issues we're facing now.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you for that. I
wanted to add to that. Oh, I'm sorry, Tanisha. I just wanted to add that really quickly. Just a quick concept for you to consider for whomever asks a question about how we continue this conversation. There's something we teach in our leadership classes around the circle of influence and the circle of concern. Your circle of concern are those issues that you have no control, they're bigger than you, they seem bigger than you, you can't control the outcomes. But your circle of influence are those things that you do have control or influence over. So although you can't continue this in the forefront of everyone's mind, there's something that you can do that you have control over in your ecosystem to continue this conversation. So if it's your organization, maybe you're getting together with a group of fellow colleagues and you're talking about solutions that you want to present to the president. Maybe it's an affinity group that you want to propose, or an initiative, or a program that continues on beyond this season of life. So focus on what you can control in your ecosystem and make strategic plans to move forward with that, because then you'll see lasting change, at least in your environment, and that's what you can control.
Great point, Wendy. We all can do something within our own circle. So thank you for highlighting that. Our next question is, I've been hearing and agree as a white woman that racism is a white person's issue to fix. I am finding it hard then to know when to reach out to my Black friends and coworkers. I don't want to rope them into conversations that they may not want to be roped into, but I want to help. What is the right way to go about some of this?
I would just say, right,
I'm
so
sorry, Dr. Lacy.
if she's feeling that way and she has people in her community or people that she works with or friends, is to ask them that, you know, what are things that I can do to be helpful in this situation, or are there things that I've done that were harmful in this situation? I think having a transparent, vulnerable conversation, you can never go wrong. I think that's the best thing that she can do to kind of kick it off, especially if she's having those feelings of thinking about what do I want to do, is to ask.
And just to piggyback on that real quickly, before you start, you know, kind of just immediately going, hey, what can I do to help? I really challenge everyone, no matter your skin color or background, to like just do research before, so you understand or try to get some of a glimpse of the brevity of what's been going on for 400 years. So when you do ask those questions, you're coming with a genuine, heartfelt, and potentially even recommendation. And I've been a part of this problem, or this is how I want to contribute to it. This is what I recognize in my unconscious bias activities I've been experiencing my whole life. So definitely challenge yourself to do that too as well. And sometimes you can get a quick read if you just check in. Hey, just thinking about you. I'm not going to ask you how you're doing, but hey, I'm here with you. I stand with you. And let's see how they reply. And if they want to welcome that conversation, I give you a call. That's another step as well.
And just to note, the pressure is not on you to solve anything or to heal anything. I like when Dr. Lacy said, just being transparent. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure how to approach you on this, but I just want to be here. How can I support you? Being real and transparent versus trying to be someone that solves their problem would be a really genuine way of reaching out to somebody you care about.
Okay, thank you all. Our next question is from a Black employer, not employee. I'd love some discussion around how Black employers have this discussion with their teams that are diverse. How to discuss in a way that stays true to your beliefs while not alienating others who may not agree with you regardless of their race. So this is a Black employer who wants to know, how should I have this conversation with my diverse team and still stay in my own Blackness while I'm doing it?
That's always a complex situation, especially when you're emotionally attached to something. But I think it's important to be objective and stick with the facts and less emotional about your personal feelings about something, so that people have space to feel comfortable sharing their feelings about something. So I always, in my HR space, I personally am a very emotional person, but when I'm in HR and I'm dealing with those critical issues, I try to detach my personal feeling from it and just state facts and be objective and create space for people to share. So I would say less of what you need and providing a space for people to share and learn is helpful, and staying away from your personal feelings. I also want to recommend that if you're feeling emotionally charged right now and in this space, it might not be a good time to have a discussion right now, right? For me, I am emotionally attached to this situation. I have two Black sons. It would not be a good time for me to lead a discussion on this because I'm emotionally connected to it. So just also checking in with yourself. Where are you in this space? Are you emotionally charged right now? Do you need to detach and state objective facts about it? I would lead with that perspective, being objective, because you are a leader. There's an additional responsibility attached to you. And so you want to be very responsible about how you share this information.
That's great feedback. Camille?
Sorry. I just want to say, I think on top of that, though, especially as a leader, and really all of us as we engage in these difficult conversations, I think we do have to be careful not to sanitize it too much, that we need to keep some of that raw emotion available for consumption. And I don't mean like to be aggressive and disruptive in a way that destroys the dialogue. But I think you need to help make it real for people that this ain't just I'm uncomfortable or I'm concerned. Like, no, I'm concerned that my family might not come home because I have a lot of data points that prove that, and you all now see them too. And yes, this hurts and this is stressful. I don't think it serves us or the authenticity of the conversation if we don't bring some of that rawness. And I had a friend who challenged me about saying I'm good when people were asking, because that's what we usually say. And I had to be honest. I was like, that's not an actual. That's not my truth, and it's what I'm used to saying, and I had to be careful with that. So that's just my counterpoint there.
Thank you. Very good point. We have some. Yes.
I just want to add to that really quick, because as a Black employer that has a diverse staff, and I agree with Camille, I think we have to be honest about our experiences, but also keep in check our emotional charge around it. Because the other part of it is we can close off people and they don't want to have the conversation with us because they can feel like we're coming from an aggressive standpoint, or they may not feel like they're going to be heard. So I think as an employer, the person who asked as a Black employer, is that we're also curious of the conversations with our staff. We listen first and seek to understand where they're coming from, and that everyone has different experiences, but stand firm in our experiences, not only as a professional employer, but also bringing in some of our personal experiences, because people can have more empathy when they are relational with you. So if they have a relationship with you, that there's a moment there that we can miss if we are in our head and coming with the bigger issue, versus that this person is connected with me, they trust me as an employer. So if I have an authentic conversation with them, but also keep my emotions in check, that there can be a long-lasting moment, because she or he is going to go home and have a conversation with their family. She or he is going to have a different perspective that they may not have considered. So I do think it's important as a leader, especially if we are a Black leader, to not be afraid to approach those conversations or even lead those conversations with our diverse staff. I think it's really important during this time.
Okay.
Hey, Tanisha, I know we're running
Yes.
late, and I'm not a panelist, but I want to share one thought that Dr. Lacey and Wendy and Camille's comments reminded me of, and that is that, balancing obviously being professional and thoughtful and respectful of others, their starting point in this diversity discussion, but also being authentic. And Dr. Lacey, you made the point of sharing personal sorts of stories in a way to be relatable. And Wendy, you mentioned you have 2 sons. I have a son as well. And I did exactly that with my boss. We were having a conversation and I found it very easy to relate to him. He's also a father. And I told him that, last week I took what for me was a normal trip out of town for one night, just a quick down and back to Fort Lauderdale. And my son erupted in tears, which he never does. And when he was able to really articulate it, he said he was just afraid that I would leave and not come back. And so that was, a way that I could share, a personal emotion that wasn't overly charged in the way, Wendy, you're discussing we should be mindful of in management, but at the same time was a very relatable moment that I think communicated better than anything else I could describe just what now is meaning to many of us. So I just wanted to share that example.
Thank you, Ernest, for sharing that with us. We're going to take one more question, although we have many, and then we'll close out because it's almost at the end of time. We could talk about this, as you all know, for hours, but our last question is, I have engaged a CEO I work with about this issue and making sure there was diversity from the boardroom to the front lines. What advice would you give to someone about how to approach the leadership of their companies, as this could be intimidating to them? Very good, on point question.
I have direct exposure to this because I'm I'm familiar with a group of people who are working on the same thing. And so what I would recommend that you do, if you have a group of people that share in your passion to create solutions, have some meetings together, brainstorm some really great solutions, create a proposal, make it well-informed, intelligent, add statistics to it, and propose it to leadership, the CEO. I think what leadership respects most is you're talking about the issues, but you have a solution presented to them, right? So we're not just talking about what's wrong, but you're providing them some advice how we can solve for this. That's the most helpful thing. That will provide you with credibility, and that will also let the CEO know that this is something you took seriously and you're not just speaking from a place of emotion. So that's my recommendation to you.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Okay, well, before we close out, I just want to thank Ernest, our moderator, and thank Ernest who reached out to me and kind of helped me come up with this concept for today and this very on time, yes, discussion, and all of our panelists, Dr. Lacey, Wendy, Paul, Camille, Latria, thank you so much for your time, for being a part of the chamber. I invite all of you in the audience, if you are not a chamber member, come and join us. Please go to our website, www.blackcommerce.org. Again, this is a very critical discussion. My phone, the text messages, the emails that are coming through, everyone's saying, I hope this was recorded. It was. It will be on our website, it will be on our YouTube channel, and it will be emailed to everyone who registered for the webinar. So again, please share this with your friends. And before we close out, I just want to leave with a quote by James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I hope that for many, this is the start of facing something that we have not faced in the past, a very difficult conversation to have, but we need everyone to make this investment, as Ernest said. It is an investment that each of us must make, and we can all do our part to bring about change. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking your time, to our panelists, to Ernest. And we ask that you continue this conversation within your families, your communities, your workplace, with your colleagues. It's very important. This is the only way that we can move forward, is if we all do it together. So again, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.